Right, today's book is going to be accompanied by the sight of gannets plunging, is Scottish National Party Leaders, edited by James Mitchell and Jerry Hassan, published by Biteback Publishing in 2016. And the first flush of victory, I presume it was composed after the referendum defeat. Studies of 17 people who have been the leaders of the SNP since it was founded. Some of them you've never heard of, some of them you wish you'd never heard of. They're not in any particular order, they're not alphabetical, they're not chronological. I don't quite know how it's been put together, but anyway, it's quite interesting. You learn some stuff about some of these people, but it has one or two problems. The first one is that it's really institutional history. There's no history of action, there's history of who said this, who said what meeting came to this decision, what meeting came to another decision, and all this kind of stuff which really is of the same sort as the history of any other institution. In other words, it's only of interest really to the people who are involved. I don't really see why it should be published. It's a kind of collection of sort of trivia, if you like, but it's tried to make it look respectable by surrounding it with the apparatus of scholarship, which in my opinion is totally inappropriate. Who needs to be absolutely sure of some of these facts? And I've got one particular example which I think is amusing. Page 88, I think it is. We have the essay, this is chapter 5, on Sir Alexander MacEwan, who I'd never heard of before, but he's introduced by saying he was a prominent Liberal early in his life and was elected a councillor in Inverness, before joining one of the precursors of the SNP, the Scottish Party, standing in the Kilmarnock by-election in 1933 with the support of the National Party of Scotland, polling a respectable 17%. With the coming together of the two parties formed the SNP in 1934, he became its first ever chair. But on the party's disappointing results in the 1935 election, he stood down. Right, so for 1 year, this guy was chair, I'm sure he was chairman actually, that was now supposed to call it chair, of the party. And we read about him as follows. He was senior partner in the legal firm of Stewart and Gould and was active in the associational, that's the word they use, life of the town of Inverness, such as the Gaelic Society. His contribution was marked with the naming of a street, MacEwan Drive, being passed by some absolutely enormous, recently sheared sheep. Appropriately, given his interest in public housing, this was in a new scheme of council houses constructed during his provostship. Vital information, you might think, and so vital that we have a footnote which, as it were, authenticates it. You know, we're not dealing here with gossip. This is real scholarly information. Thus we have Frank G. Thompson from A Different Drum, a biographical note on Sir Alexander MacEwan, Inverness, in the Transactions of the Gaelic Society of Inverness, Volume 60, 1997-98, on pages 108 to 124. We also have the Glasgow Herald, 30th of June 1941, page 6. 30th of June, of course. Anybody interested in Russia and the rule of law will know is exactly 8 days after the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Brest fortress was still holding out, but the Germans were crashing into central, what now would be called Belarus. Nonetheless, we are having in our newspapers information about the renaming of a street in Inverness. Likewise, we have The Northern Chronicle, 2nd of July 1941, page 2. The Inverness Courier, 1st of July 1941, page 3. And just if you don't think that was enough to ensure that you've hammered home the fact this is a fact, not gossip, we have the Highland News, 5th of July 1941, page 3. Okay, we are clear now that a street in Inverness of council houses was named after Sir Alexander McKeon. The apparatus of scholarship. Yeah, the bibliography with about 250 items in it. And it includes, if you can believe this, quite extraordinary, it includes a biography of President Eisenhower. There's a pretty sort of discontented looking sheep coming and going. That's what we just heard there. Anyway, it includes a biography of President Eisenhower. Another book with the exciting title, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. Machiavelli's The Prince. The pre-war volume of Harold Macmillan's 6-volume autobiography. Harold Nicholson's diaries. And this is the amusing bit, 3 books written by Douglas Young, who was the star of the party in the time of the Second World War, because he refused to allow, or he went to jail. He was quite happy to go to jail because he was contesting the fact that the Treaty of Union forbade the British government, in his reading of it, forbade the British government from forcibly conscripting the Scottish people to fight in Britain's wars. He objected to Scottish people being conscripted to fight against the Germans. You might well ask what his motives were. I think self-publicity is the main one. It certainly comes through in the inadvertently in the essay on him. He was a clever guy. He was professor of something or other at Aberdeen University, Greek or classics of some sort. He was 6'5" tall, and he obviously had a strange range of interests, because the biography quotes him in 1942, a book he wrote called Quislings in Scotland. In 1943, this is now after Stalingrad, he published a book called Fascism in the Highlands. And then in 1944, when he stood in the Kirkcaldy by-election and did quite well, he published a book called Hitlerism in the Highlands. Page 306, in the course of the essay on John Swinney, who anybody who follows politics might have heard of him. He never achieved anything, but he was the leader of the party at one stage, so he merits inclusion in this thing. And John Swinney recalls a National Council meeting in December 1982 at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, where matters arising from the minutes of the previous meeting took more than 6 hours. I think navel-gazing, self-importance and eccentricity are the 3 words that spring to mind with that important piece of information. I think it's incumbent upon any reviewer of a book like this to make some mention of Nicola Sturgeon. Page 356, we read, she is a formidable woman. Page 359, she was formidable in opposition. And then in government, on page 364, we are told that she is one of the world's most powerful women, which I really, you can gild the lily, but I don't know quite what the phrase for that is. On page 355, we learn that she's an introvert with few lifelong friends, and she met her husband at the age of 18 on a party youth weekend. I think it would be polite not to go any further with that. However, there's one thing that is important, because on page 358 we read that she is fueled by hatred of Thatcher, which she says has been, quote, the motivation of my entire political career. I don't quite know how many years Margaret Thatcher has been dead, but certainly it's been 30 years since she was in power, but yet Nicola Sturgeon is still sitting there hating this woman, getting up every day. The motivation, she says, of her entire political career, she gets up every day in Bute House, goes down to the office, fueled by a hatred of a person who's been dead for something like 10 or 15 years and out of power for 30 years. The one thing I think about that is it's a beautiful world. Look at this. Absolutely beautiful day, beautiful place. The whole of the Highlands of Scotland in this kind of weather, or on a day like this, it's just lovely. And yet you have people whose entire life is fueled by hatred of somebody, and we are subjected to it. And we have this fact on authority from no less a figure than Michael Russell, who's in fact the MSP for this particular act, right as we speak. Refuses to answer my letters, but what's new, probably the only really important fact that comes out of this book. God, it's glorious now. The sun's beating down, clouds are going, even the wind's dropping. So it's cool. But we get, must get back to work. And so we learn that Michael Russell says, the famous white paper, which I can't remember the name of, and it's the notes, we don't get the same kind of lunatic level of footnotes here with his essay. This is him, this he's written. It's not about him because he was never leader of the party, but he writes an essay. There's one essay at the beginning, just on the leadership of the SNP by the two people who edited the book, and then the second chapter, and the only one that isn't actually about a specific leader, is by Michael Russell, and it's called Leadership in Perspective. And what he's talking about is the fact that the SNP party conferences are increasingly stage-managed affairs, tightly controlled, but not as tightly controlled as some other parties, he says. Well, what has not been opened up for the type of, important debate is the strategy with which the party hopes to achieve its aim of independence. Now, that in itself is pretty damning, I would have thought. However, we also have the fact that this great 600-page document, which was published in advance of the 2014 referendum, called Scotland's Opportunity or something like that, I can't even remember the title, which was produced at massive expense. I forget how much, but it's mentioned in the afterword to the Justice Factory. So that document was extremely important. I mean, essentially people voted on that document as far as the government's concerned. I mean, you could validly argue nobody read it, but that was the statement, and it was totally one-sided. I've referred to this in the afterword. In Chapter 2 for independence, and it has no Chapter 3 saying the case against independence. It was prepared by the Civil Service. Sir Peter Housden, who's mentioned here, he's some sort of fanatic from Essex who helped her. And we learn from Michael Russell the following astounding fact, that there's been no great debate about policy in the party, and the Yes movement at the time of the referendum, I can't believe there was anybody in the SNP who wasn't voting yes, was dominated by the SNP at official level, but there was no wider formal discussion in the party of how that position would be used. Right, so the people of Scotland weren't consulted, and even the people in the Yes campaign weren't consulted, and even people in the SNP part of the Yes campaign weren't consulted. The White Paper on Independence, that's the document I'm referring to, was produced by the present First Minister, that is Nicola Sturgeon, while she was Deputy First Minister, without that democratic input, and indeed there was limited opportunity for cabinet members and ministers to influence it. So the document, which informed the independence referendum, was prepared by the civil service, a one-sided document prepared by the civil service based on Nicola Sturgeon's fundamental political motivation for her entire life, which is a hatred of Margaret Thatcher. I think that is actually a very important admission. We are dealing with a bunch of haters here. Not only that, I'm going to make one final point, and it's about the almost sectarian nature of their attitude to Scotland. And this is also in the essay on Nicola Sturgeon. The lady who's writing this, by the way, is the editor of the Holyrood magazine. Her name is Mandy Rhodes. There's got little pen portraits of the authors of these things, so I shall just refer you to the one. Mandy Rhodes, Managing Director of Holyrood Communications and Managing Editor of Holyrood magazine. She's worked for nearly 30 years in journalism in Scotland, in newsprint, television and radio broadcasting, was Scotland on Sunday's social affairs correspondent, and has won numerous awards, including the PPA Magazine Editor of the Year, Feature Writer of the Year and Columnist of the Year. So okay, we're dealing with somebody who, at least in Scottish local terms, appears to have some sort of clout, influence, and is taken seriously, let's put it like that. And we get the following sentence from this lady. Sturgeon stands out from other professional politicians not only because she is a woman, but because she appears authentically Scots. What does that mean? We get 4 criteria for being authentically Scots. State educated, working class, left-leaning, and believably human. I think it's worth dwelling on that. To be authentically Scots, you have to be state educated, working class, left-leaning, and believably human. Now, I'm as Scottish as anybody. I've no ancestry that I know of outside Scotland. I'm part of Scotland. I live in Scotland, I was born in Scotland. I'm Scottish. And not anything else, I'm Scottish. But I was not educated in the state system. I'm not working class, certainly not left-leaning, and probably not believably human. So I'm not authentically Scots, yet I am Scottish. This is complete drivel. Not only that, it's self-serving, politicised drivel, trying to turn people who are different from you into aliens. Do we not deserve citizenship? How long will it be before we're not allowed to vote in Scottish elections because we are not authentically Scots? What about all these immigrants that they love so much? They might have been state educated, it might have been in Beirut, because that's okay, as long as you're not educated at Glenarmond or Fettes. I think it is absolutely one of the most disgusting admissions by a prominent journalist when writing about one of the world's most powerful women that I have ever read. And I don't think there's anything further worth saying about this. It's a good effort, it's well produced, it's nice, it's a nice artefact. I'm not blaming Biteback Publications, who are in any case an English firm, and there we have it. Scottish National Party leaders. Buy it at your emotional, intellectual and spiritual peril.